She lost everything after 60, until a Buddhist monk whispered this one truth. Chapter 1. The Fall. When life suddenly slipped away. Before we begin today's story, take a deep breath and allow yourself to be here fully. If you're over 50 and seeking a calmer, wiser way to walk through the second half of life, this space is for you. Please consider subscribing to this channel so we can journey together through stories of healing, Buddhist wisdom, and the quiet joy of simply being alive. Now, let me tell you about Sarah. She was 62 when her life, as she had known it, came undone. Sarah had spent 4 decades building a life around family, a stable home, and a long career as a school administrator in a small town in Oregon. She had always been the kind of woman who remembered everyone's birthday, cooked for church events, and kept the linen closet neatly folded. But life, as the Buddha taught, is impermanent, anicca. And one by one, the things she thought would never change began to dissolve. Her husband, Tom, the love of her life for 35 years, was diagnosed with a rare form of cancer. It came fast, took faster. Within 8 months he was gone, leaving behind an empty chair at the kitchen table and a silence so loud it pierced her bones. Then came the ripple effects. Retirement, which once seemed like a doorway to rest, now felt like exile. Her children, grown and busy, were loving, but distant. Phone calls became shorter, holidays were quiet. And one day, standing alone in the middle of her living room, surrounded by furniture that hadn't moved in years, she whispered aloud, "What am I supposed to do now?" The question echoed, not just in the room, but in her soul. In the end, only 3 things matter, said Jack Cornfield, a great teacher of Buddhist wisdom. How much you loved, how gently you lived, and how gracefully you let go of things not meant for you. But Sarah wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Because letting go felt like betrayal of her memories, of her love, of her former self. And so, for the first time in decades, she fell into a quiet kind of grief no one could see. Not depression exactly, more like a sense of fading. Life gently unraveling in slow motion. She stopped making lists. She stopped watching her favorite shows. Some mornings, she didn't bother getting dressed. Time drifted. One evening, while washing a single plate, Sarah looked out the window and saw the setting sun bleeding orange into the horizon. And for just a moment, she felt nothing. Not awe, not sadness, just emptiness. A hollow so wide it felt sacred in a way. It was the first crack of awakening. Grief in Buddhism is not a curse, it is a teacher. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from clinging to people, to status, to control, to permanence. We suffer not because things change, but because we expect them not to. Sarah didn't know this teaching yet, but she was beginning to sense a truth, that perhaps life wasn't breaking her, it was opening her. That week, a friend called, not one of the close ones, just someone from her old yoga class. "There's a Buddhist center in the next town. They're doing a meditation morning for beginners," she said. "I don't meditate," Sarah replied. "Me neither," her friend laughed, "but they have tea and cookies." It was the first time Sarah had laughed in months. The following Saturday she went, not because she believed in enlightenment, not because she was ready, but because something in her, maybe grief, maybe grace, had grown tired of being alone. The center was quiet. Bare walls, gentle incense, warm wooden floors, a row of cushions. She sat near the back, unsure if she was supposed to cross her legs or keep her shoes on. Nobody seemed to care. An older monk stepped into the room. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't give a sermon. He just rang a bell, a soft, ancient chime, and the room fell into silence. 15 minutes passed, maybe 20. Sarah's legs ached. Her thoughts raced. But somewhere in that silence, something unexpected happened. She didn't want to run away, not because it was easy, but because it was honest. The silence didn't try to fix her, it just held her, like open arms that expected nothing. Peace, said the Buddha, comes from within. Do not seek it without. That night, Sarah lay in bed, eyes open in the dark, and whispered to no one in particular, "Maybe I don't need to figure it all out." She wasn't healed, but she had felt something different that day. Not hope exactly, but space. A space where sorrow wasn't shameful, where aging wasn't a curse, where silence was not the absence of life, but the beginning of it. It was only the beginning. And though she didn't know it yet, Sarah was being invited not to return to her old life, but to awaken to something deeper, something ancient, something that had always been quietly waiting inside her. Chapter 2. The quiet grief no one saw. They say grief has many faces. Some grief wails at funerals, some collapses in the hallway, fists pounding the ground, but some grief whispers. It hides in smiles. It does the dishes. It says, "I'm fine, just tired." And no one ever suspects that inside, a soul is slowly unraveling. This was the kind of grief Sarah carried. After the meditation morning, something inside her had shifted, but not in the dramatic way movies might suggest. It wasn't as if she returned home transformed, singing mantras or glowing with newfound wisdom. She came home to the same walls, the same worn carpet, the same photo of Tom by the fireplace, smiling from the past, like nothing had changed. But something had changed, because for the first time Sarah noticed the silence. She didn't fight it, she didn't fill it, she just sat with it. That week, Sarah moved through her routines like a ghost, wearing a polite smile. She went to the store. She waved at her neighbor. She answered texts with emojis. But under it all, her chest felt tight, like she was always holding her breath. This wasn't depression in the clinical sense. It was more like a soft fog, not dark enough to demand help, but heavy enough to dull everything she touched. No one called to ask how she was really doing, because everyone assumed she was okay, because Sarah was always the strong one, the one who sent holiday cards, the one who brought lasagna when other people were grieving, but no one asked, "Sarah, how is your soul?" Grief is not a disorder, a disease, or a sign of weakness. It is a natural response to loss. It is not something we get over, but rather something we learn to carry. Dr. Alan Wolfelt, in Buddhism, we are taught that everything arises and passes away, not just our bodies, but our emotions, our roles, our identities. Who was Sarah? Now, if she wasn't a wife, a caretaker, or a mother, people called every day, who was she without being needed? The quiet grief she felt wasn't just about losing Tom. It was about losing herself, or at least the self she had spent a lifetime constructing. This is the part of loss people rarely talk about. Not the funeral, not the paperwork, but the rearranging of the soul that comes in the months afterward, when everyone else has moved on, but you haven't. One evening, Sarah sat by the window holding a warm mug of tea. The steam rose slowly like incense smoke, curling into the air. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, their branches dancing gently, not resisting, just bending. She thought about the monk again, his silence, the way he listened without leaning forward, the way he didn't offer advice, just presence. There was something so radically kind about it. He didn't try to fix her. He just made space for her to be. Sometimes the most healing thing we can do is simply be present with ourselves, with our pain, with our breath. Thich Nhat Hanh Sara began to wonder, what if I stopped pretending everything was okay? What if I stopped apologizing for being lost? That night, she did something she hadn't done since college. She took out an old notebook and began to write, not a list, not a plan, just a stream of her heart. She wrote, "I don't know who I am anymore. I miss him. I miss being useful. I miss having a reason to get up. I'm afraid I've already lived the best years of my life. But something small, something in me wants to wake up," she cried, but not in a collapsing kind of way. They were tears of release, like her body had been waiting for permission to feel, and in that simple act of writing, of naming what hurt without shame, she had taken the first true step toward healing. The wound is the place where the light enters you. Rumi and Buddhist practice, we are taught the power of naming. Naming is not clinging, it's not wallowing, it's clarity. We name suffering not to amplify it, but to see it clearly, and in that seeing we loosen its grip. That week, Sarah made a quiet decision. Each morning, before checking her phone, before reading the news, she would light a candle and sit, even for 5 minutes. She didn't know the proper techniques. She didn't chant in Pali. She didn't wear robes. She just sat and watched and breathed. At first, her mind wandered, a lot. But the monk's voice echoed in her heart. There is no need to fix your life. Just sit with your breath. She began to notice small things, the way the light hit the bookshelf at 8 a.m., the warmth of tea in her throat, the sound of a bird outside that seemed to sing just for her. These weren't grand awakenings. They were quiet reunions with life. And slowly, the quiet grief began to soften, not disappear, not yet. But it no longer felt like an enemy. It became something like a companion, a teacher sitting silently beside her. By the end of the month, Sarah returned to the meditation center, not because she had become a spiritual person, not because she had answers, but because for the first time in a long time, she wanted to be somewhere. If you've ever felt that quiet grief, the kind no one sees, the kind you hide behind small talk and chores, know this: you are not broken. You are not behind. You are not too old to begin again. As the Buddha taught, each morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most, and perhaps like Sarah, your grief is not here to punish you, but to invite you to slow down, to listen, to come home to yourself. If this story has stirred something in your heart, I invite you to stay with us. Subscribe to this channel. These stories are not just stories. They are gentle awakenings. And you are welcome here, exactly as you are. Chapter 3. The Unexpected Invitation. Sometimes the most important moments of our lives don't begin with fireworks. They begin with a casual phone call. It was a Tuesday morning. The sky was grey, the kind of grey that makes you want to stay under a blanket with a cup of something warm. Sarah was standing in her kitchen stirring oatmeal when the phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Jenna, yoga group. She hadn't spoken to Jenna in nearly a year. They used to take a gentle yoga class together before Tom got sick. Sarah hesitated before answering. Something in her chest tensed, but curiosity won. "Hi, Sarah?" Jenna's voice was bright, too bright for such a grey morning. "I don't want to keep you long. I was just calling because, well, I thought of you." Sarah's heart softened. No one had said that in a long time. There's this little Buddhist center outside of town. Nothing fancy, just cushions on the floor and some tea. They're having a half-day retreat this weekend. Beginner's welcome. No chanting, just silence. And a little guidance. I thought maybe you'd like it. For a moment, Sarah wanted to say no, not because she wasn't interested, but because something inside her still whispered, "You don't belong there. You don't know how to do this. You're too broken, too old to begin again." But another voice, quieter but truer, simply said, "Go." A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. Lao Tzu so. She said yes. That Saturday she drove out past the edge of town, past the shopping, centers, past the neighborhoods, until the roads narrowed and the trees leaned in like guardians. The Buddhist center wasn't grand, just a small wood-framed building nestled between pines with a faded sign that read, "Still Water Sangha." Sarah embarked. She sat in her car for a few minutes, heart fluttering with quiet anxiety. What if I can't sit still? What if I cry in front of strangers? But something stronger than fear pulled her toward the door. She entered barefoot. The floor was smooth and cool. A soft smell of sandalwood hung in the air. No one rushed to greet her, and somehow that felt kind. There were others, older women, a few men with graying beards, a young woman with a shaved head. All of them sat in silence, sipping tea or adjusting their cushions. A monk, thin, elderly, his robe simple and clean, entered without fanfare. He bowed gently and sat on a raised mat. He smiled, but said nothing for a long time. Then, finally, he spoke, not loudly, not slowly, just clearly. "You have already arrived. There is nowhere else you need to be." Something in Sarah cracked open. She didn't know what she expected, perhaps advice, instruction, affirmation. But this invitation to presence felt like a balm on her weary heart. "You are not a problem to be solved. You are a mystery to be embraced." Adyashanti, the monk, continued, "Today we will not try to fix anything. We will not strive for peace. We will simply sit and allow what is already here to be." And so they did. They sat in silence. 20 minutes passed, then a gentle bell, a slow walking meditation, then more sitting. Sarah's knees ached, her thoughts wandered. At one point she thought about laundry, at another about her husband's laugh. But then something extraordinary happened in the most ordinary way. She noticed her breath, not just as a function, but as a friend. Breathing in, I calm body and mind. Breathing out, I smile. Dwelling in the present moment, I know this is a wonderful moment. Teach Nat Han. During the break, Sarah poured herself a cup of green tea. She stood under a tree outside and felt the breeze on her face. For a moment, she didn't feel lost, or grieving, or invisible. She just was, not fixed, not healed, but alive, present. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, "Maybe I don't need to have all the answers. Maybe this is enough." After the final sit, the monk bowed again. He said, "Most people search for peace as if it is hidden, but peace is like the sky, always there, sometimes covered but never gone." Sarah cried on the way home, but it wasn't the heavy cry of sorrow. It was the light cry of release, of someone who had carried something far too long and had just now set it down. She didn't know what would come next. But for the first time in a long time, that no longer terrified her. The way out of suffering is not to escape it, but to gently turn toward it. Pema Chodron had taken the first step, not toward doing, but toward being, and in that one still Saturday, she began the quiet work of coming home to herself. Dear friend, if you're still here with us, take a moment now, breathe in, breathe out, let your shoulders drop, let your heart soften. You don't need to become someone else. You don't need to be fixed. You don't need to wait for life to get better to begin living again. The moment is already whole, and you are already enough. If this story has spoken to you, please subscribe. Let's walk together toward stillness, toward peace, toward a deeper joy that was never lost, only waiting to be seen. Chapter 4. Tea with the Monk. There are moments in life that do not come with lightning or thunder, only the sound of tea pouring into porcelain. Yet these moments shift the axis of the soul in ways no storm ever could. For Sarah, that moment began with a simple question from the woman at the door. "Would you like to stay for tea?" It was after the half-day retreat, and most of the other attendees had quietly gone. Sarah lingered near the exit, unsure whether to stay or slip away unnoticed. The invitation startled her, soft, unexpected, and gently sincere. She nodded, and that's how she found herself sitting at a small wooden table across from the elderly monk. The same one whose voice had wrapped around her like a warm blanket earlier that day. He poured tea without hurry, each motion deliberate, quiet, without waste. For a few minutes, no one spoke. The steam from the cups curled between them like incense, rising and fading into the late afternoon air. Finally, the monk looked up. "Is this your first time sitting with your breath?" he asked. Sarah smiled sheepishly. "Yes, and my legs hate me for it." He chuckled, a soft sound like wind through pine needles. "And your heart?" he asked. She paused. The question caught her off guard. Then, softly, honestly, "My heart feels tired, not broken exactly, just worn thin," the monk nodded, as if he already knew. "You have suffered, Sarah," he said, "but you have also endured, and endurance with kindness. That is the mark of a strong heart." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, not from pain, but from the sheer relief of being seen. She had spent so long being strong for others, for her children, for her late husband, for her friends, that she'd almost forgotten what it felt like to be simply human, vulnerable, real. The monk gently placed his cup down and said something she would remember for the rest of her life. "Sometimes, losing everything is the way the universe invites us to begin again." Those words dropped into her like a stone in a still pond. Ripples of recognition spread through her chest. She had come to the retreat not knowing what she needed, not knowing who she was anymore. But in that quiet sentence and that sacred whisper of truth, something shifted. You only lose what you cling to. Buddha. The monk continued. "We often think that happiness comes from adding things to our lives. Success, love, purpose. But true peace often arrives when everything else falls away, when there is nothing left to hold on to. That is when we begin to see clearly." Sarah looked into her tea, watching the leaves settle. "I feel like I'm no one now," she said, voice trembling. "I was a wife, a mother, a worker. Now I just exist." The monk leaned in slightly, his gaze kind. "Existence is enough," he said. "The flower does not need a title to bloom. The moon does not ask for permission to shine. And you, dear, do not need to be anyone to be whole." Sarah was silent, her throat tight, her eyes blurred, but her heart was listening. She realized in that moment that all her life she had been trying to prove she was worthy, of love, of respect, of being seen. But sitting here, across from this gentle teacher, sipping tea in a room with no clocks and no expectations, she felt something strange and new, enoughness. Not because anything had changed, but because she had stopped resisting what was already true. The monk smiled, as if sensing her shift. "There is a teaching we hold dear," he said. "Do not seek the truth, only cease to cherish opinions." He let that hang in the air. "Most of our suffering," he continued, "comes from our attachment to the idea that life should be different, that we should be different. But when we release those stories, even for a breath, we come home." Sarah breathed in, slow and deep. "Peace is this moment without judgment," said Buddhist teacher Sylvia Borstin. "That is all." They sat in silence for a while after that. Just two human beings sharing the sacredness of a still moment. No grand advice, no 10 steps to happiness, just tea, just truth. Before Sarah left, the monk handed her a small slip of paper. On it, in careful handwriting, were 5 words. "You are already at home." She clutched it like a treasure. Driving home that evening, Sarah didn't turn on the radio. She didn't check her phone. She just drove in silence, watching the road, the sky, the trees. She felt no need to rush, no urgency to fix anything, no panic to plan her next step, because now She carried something within her, not answers, but awareness, not a map, but a compass. She didn't yet know how deeply those 5 words would echo through her life. She didn't yet know that, from this point on, she would no longer seek happiness as something outside herself. She only knew that the monk had seen her, and in doing so had helped her see herself, not as broken, not as lost, but as already home. The real voyage of discovery, wrote Marcel Proust, consists not in seeking new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Sarah was beginning to see, and what she saw for the first time in years was peace. If this story has brought stillness to your heart, I invite you to pause, breathe, and return to the wisdom within you. And if you'd like to keep walking this path with us, subscribe to this channel. We'll keep meeting here through story, through silence, through the sacred whisper that says you are already at home. Chapter 5. The One Whispered Truth. The smallest words spoken with presence can echo through a lifetime. For days after her tea with the monk, Sarah moved through her world more slowly, not out of sadness, but as if life had suddenly become something sacred. The light through her kitchen window felt softer. The wind in the trees outside her home sounded like a conversation she had never learned to hear. Even the silence, once haunting, had become something almost holy. But there was still a question that lingered beneath it all. A quiet ache that she could not name, not fully. She still didn't understand what to do next. It was a familiar pattern. For most of her life, Sarah had equated meaning with doing, being useful, being needed, being productive. Now, in the stillness that remained, she felt afloat, peaceful, yes, but also unanchored. The following week she returned to the Buddhist center, this time not for a retreat, but just to walk the garden path and perhaps sit in silence. The small gravel path curled gently around a koi pond, with stone benches tucked under. Pine trees. She found one, sat down and closed her eyes. For several minutes she simply listened. Not to thoughts, but to the world, the breeze, the soft splash of water, the distant hum of bees moving through lavender. Her mind quieted, and for a brief moment there was only being. She didn't hear the monk approach. But when she opened her eyes, he was already sitting beside her, as if he had been there all along. "Good to see you again, Sarah," he said warmly. She smiled. "I've been thinking a lot," she admitted, "trying to understand what comes next, what I'm supposed to do with the rest of my life." The monk looked at her, his eyes kind, patient. Then he leaned in slightly and said, almost in a whisper, "There is no need to fix your life. Just sit with your breath. You are already home." It wasn't a grand revelation. It wasn't a sermon. It was a truth, soft, simple, and terrifyingly freeing. Sarah blinked. "But if I don't try to fix my life, how will I move forward?" she asked. The monk just smiled. "Forward is not always the direction the soul needs. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without." Buddha, his words, like a stone gently placed in still water, created ripples in her chest. At first, they confused her. Then they softened her. She had been searching for a plan, a next job, a new identity, a sense of external purpose. But the monk's whisper pointed her inward, not toward answers, but toward presence, toward what was already whole. "You have already survived the great fire of loss," he said. "You do not need to rebuild the old house. You are free to build something new, or to live with open sky." Sarah sat in silence, digesting this. Tears. They came, but this time they were gentle, like the body's way of saying thank you. She remembered something the Buddhist teacher Tara Brach once wrote. "The path is not about making yourself worthy. It's about remembering that you already are." She had spent so much of her life trying to become enough for her children, for her husband, for the expectations of the world. But now, here she was, enough in her being. enough in her breath, whole, simply because she existed. The monk continued softly, "In our tradition we say, don't chase after the world. Let the world come to you. When you sit with presence, when you walk slowly, when you speak with care, life will unfold at its own perfect rhythm. You don't need to chase meaning. You are meaning." Sarah closed her eyes. It was the first time she had ever heard someone say that and actually believe it. They sat there together in silence again. No urgency, no need to define anything. A butterfly floated by, paused, then moved on. And for the first time in years, Sarah felt no need to catch or name it. She simply let it be. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer. "I think I've been afraid," she said, "afraid that if I stop trying, I'll disappear." The monk nodded. We all fear disappearance. But here is the paradox. It is only when we let go of trying to be someone that we become free to be ourselves. The self is a story, he continued, a beautiful one perhaps, but still just a story. What you are, truly, is beyond name, beyond title, beyond all becoming. Sarah breathed in slowly, then exhaled. She looked up at the sky, so much space, so much light, and then she whispered, mostly to herself, "So I don't have to go anywhere?" "No," the monk said gently. "You're already here." That night, back home, Sarah wrote in her journal, "I have spent years believing that healing was somewhere outside of me. But now I understand. Healing is what happens when I stop running, when I sit, when I listen, when I remember that breath is enough, that life is not a project, that I am not broken, that I am home." And so the whisper remained with her. A compass in quiet moments, a balm in moments of sorrow, a truth that needed no proof. You are already at home. Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it. Rumi, dear friend, if you're still with us, if your heart has been tired from searching, if your soul has been waiting for permission to rest, this is your whisper too. There is nothing you must become. There is no destination you must reach. Right here, right now, you are already home. Take one gentle breath, feel the life within you. That is enough. That has always been enough. Chapter 6. Sitting in stillness, healing in silence. In the West, we are taught that healing comes through doing, through solving problems, setting goals, chasing better versions of ourselves. But in Buddhism, we are taught something more radical, something softer, something quieter. Healing begins when we stop. When Sarah sat alone in her living room that evening, the monk's words still echoed in her chest. There is no need to fix your life. Just sit with your breath. It was almost too simple. Could it really be that all she needed to do was be stillness had once terrified her? In the days after Tom died, silence had felt like a cruel reminder of what had been lost, a vacuum filled with memories and absence. But now, through the monk's presence, silence was being reintroduced to her as something entirely different, a space for meeting herself. The next morning, before emails, before breakfast, before even brushing her hair, Sarah lit a small candle and sat on the floor, no cushion, no bells, just a folded blanket and a quiet corner by the window where light pooled in gentle gold across the floorboards. She set a timer for 10 minutes. At first, she fidgeted. Her legs ached. Her mind raced. What if this is a waste of time? Should I be walking instead? I forgot to reply to Jenna's message, but she remembered the monk's instruction. Don't try to stop your thoughts. Just watch them, like clouds drifting across a wide sky. So she breathed, and she watched, and slowly, thought by thought, her inner sky widened. You should sit in meditation for 20 minutes a day, a Zen proverb says. Unless you're too busy, then you should sit for an hour. Sarah laughed when she read that later in a book, because it was true. Busyness, she was realizing, wasn't always about being productive. Sometimes busyness was a form of avoidance, a way to escape ourselves, to avoid the quiet voice within that longs to be heard. But now, in stillness, that voice began to speak, not in words but in sensations, a soft warmth in her chest, a loosening behind her eyes, a surprising sense of okayness she hadn't felt in years. The first week, she sat for 10 minutes a day, then 15. By the third week, it wasn't about time anymore. It was about space. The space between thoughts, the space between breaths. The sacred space of simply being. She didn't try to become good at meditation. She didn't judge herself when her mind wandered. Instead, she smiled, she returned. Smile, breathe, and go slowly. Thich Nhat Hanh, something remarkable began to happen. The noise in her head, the endless commentary about not being enough, not doing enough, not knowing what's next, began to lose its power. Not because it disappeared, but because she stopped believing it so deeply. One morning, a thought passed through her mind. "You're just wasting time sitting here." She smiled. "Thank you," she whispered back, "but I'm okay." That small act, that inner bow to the wandering mind, became a practice of compassion in itself. She no longer fought her thoughts, she befriended them, and by doing so, they softened. 1. Afternoon, after meditating, Sarah walked outside and really noticed, the camellia bush in bloom. She had passed it every day, but this time she saw its color, deep crimson, the petals gently unfolding. She placed her hand over her heart and whispered, "I'm unfolding too." "Meditation is not about becoming a different person," wrote Sharon Salzberg. "It's about discovering who you are beneath all the noise." Sarah was discovering something deeper than roles, deeper than sorrow, deeper than identity. She was discovering presence, and in presence there was healing. Not the dramatic healing of miracles, but the quiet kind, the softening of grief, the return of breath, the surprising joy of simply washing dishes with full attention. She wasn't moving on from her pain. She was learning to sit beside it, to hold it gently, to listen without judgment. One day, during a longer sit, a memory surfaced, a vivid moment of Tom laughing in the kitchen years ago as they danced to a song on the radio. The memory brought tears, but instead of pushing it away, she whispered, "Thank you." The tears came, and she let them. No shame, no clinging, just the river of life, flowing through. To understand everything is to forgive everything. Buddha, she understood now, that she did not have to erase the past to find peace. She only had to make peace with her relationship to it, and stillness was the doorway. By the end of the month, meditation was no longer a task. It was her sanctuary. When she woke in the middle of the night, anxious or restless, she no longer reached for distraction. She reached for her breath. When sadness arose, she sat with it. She placed a hand on her heart and said the words the monk had taught her. "This too belongs." Sarah was changing, not in the way others might notice, but in the way only the soul can feel. She smiled more. She judged less. She said no more easily. She paused before reacting. She felt like herself, perhaps for the first time since childhood. Not the version of herself the world needed her to be, but the one that simply was. Silence is not the absence of something, but the presence of everything. La Gordon Hempton, and so she continued to sit. 10 minutes, sometimes 20, sometimes just 5, but always with reverence, not for the practice, but for the life that revealed itself within the stillness. Dear friend, if your days feel noisy, if your thoughts feel heavy, if your heart has forgotten what it feels like to rest, I invite you, like Sarah, to sit. No expectations, no goals, just breath, just presence, just you, exactly as you are, because in that stillness, healing doesn't need to be chased. It finds you, and sometimes that is the most sacred truth of all. Chapter 7. Reclaiming her life, but differently. The quiet doesn't just soothe, it transforms. After weeks of sitting in stillness, something subtle but profound had shifted in Sarah. She no longer woke up with the same sense of dread that used to accompany the silence of her home. The emptiness that once felt so heavy had softened into something spacious, not lonely, but open. This wasn't the same life she had before her husband passed, before retirement rearranged her world. But it was a new life. And in many ways, one far more alive. Sarah didn't return to the life she had once known. She didn't chase productivity. She didn't make long to-do lists. She didn't try to reclaim her former identity. Instead, she reclaimed her presence, and in doing so, she began to discover a quieter kind of purpose, not rooted in doing more, but in being more fully present to what already was. When we are no longer caught in the past or consumed by the future, we reclaim the only moment we truly have, this one. Thich Nhat Hanh began to notice small things. The neighbor's dog, always eager for attention. The sound of her own footsteps on gravel. The way tea tasted different when she drank it slowly, without scrolling on her phone. Even simple things like folding laundry or watering her houseplants became little rituals of mindfulness. But perhaps the biggest shift was in how she began to reconnect with others. She didn't try to be the life of the party. She didn't host events. She didn't launch projects or reinvent herself. Instead, she started small. One day she volunteered at the Buddhist center to help with setup before meditation mornings. Another day, she joined a quiet community circle, a group of older adults who simply gathered to sit in silence, drink tea, and share a few heartfelt words if they felt called. No one was pressured to perform or pretend. No one asked, "What do you do?" Instead, they asked, "How is your breath today?" And for Sarah, that question meant more than anyone could know. In one of the circles, a woman named Grace, silver-haired and soft-voiced, shared a story about losing her sister to cancer. Her voice trembled as she spoke, and Sarah, sitting beside her, gently placed a hand over Grace's. She didn't offer advice. She didn't try to cheer her up. She simply said, "You're not alone." And in that simple gesture, Sarah found a purpose, not the kind you write in resumes. Not the kind that's praised or measured, but the kind that is felt deeply in the presence we offer others. Our true purpose, said Ram Dass, is to help each other walk home. Sarah was walking home, and now gently she was, helping others do the same. She began writing not for publication but for herself, and for a few women she met in her community. She called the journal Tea Letters from the Quiet Side of Life. Each week, she sent a short letter by email, just a few paragraphs, sharing her thoughts on aging, mindfulness, loss, and what it meant to begin again in a world that often feared stillness. To her surprise, the letters were passed around. Others started responding. Some shared their own stories. Others simply wrote, "Thank you for reminding me I'm not broken." Sarah smiled when she read that. That was the truth she had needed too. One morning, while walking a wooded trail behind her neighborhood, she paused under a large oak. The light filtered through the branches in long golden strands. The wind rustled. The leaves, not as noise but as music. She placed her hand on the tree and whispered, "I'm still here." But this time, those words weren't filled with grief or disbelief. They were filled with awe. Not, "I'm still here, in spite of everything," but, "I'm still here, and I'm just beginning to understand what that means." In Buddhism, this moment of realization that life as it is enough is a form of awakening. Not the kind you shout from rooftops, but the kind that fills your chest with stillness. The kind that turns sorrow into spaciousness and transforms routine into ritual. Sarah hadn't fixed her life. She had stopped trying to fix herself, and in doing so, she had returned to life, and life, simple, ordinary, miraculous life had embraced her back. After the ecstasy, the laundry. Jack Cornfield. Yes, there were still bills. There were still doctor's appointments. The world still spun with its noise and uncertainties. But something inside Sarah remained steady now, a still point in the center of her chest. Each time she felt herself pulled by fear or regret, she would pause and breathe. She had learned not to run from pain, but to bow to it, not to escape loneliness, but to greet it like an old friend and listen to what it had to teach. More than once her daughter asked, "Mom, are you okay? You seem different, happier, but also quieter." Sarah smiled. "I'm not trying to be anything anymore, I'm just here." She no longer measured her days by accomplishments. She measured them by presence. Did I listen deeply today? Did I take one true breath? Did I smile at a stranger? Did I sit with my tea in silence? If the answer was yes, that was enough. Dear friend, if you've ever wondered whether it's too late to begin again, know this. Sarah's life didn't become louder. It became deeper. She didn't return to who she was. She grew into someone truer, and you can too. Not by chasing transformation, but by coming home to yourself, exactly as you are. Let your life be simple. Let it be quiet. Let it be sacred in its softness. The world doesn't need you to do more. It needs you, awake, kind, present. And that, my friend, is more than enough. Chapter 8. The Beauty of Empty Hands. There was a morning, not long after the leaves began to fall, when Sarah stood in her garden with a pair of gloves in one hand and a trowel in the other. The autumn light spilled across her face, and, for a moment she paused, not to think, not to plan, but to simply be. A breeze passed through the maple trees. A few golden leaves danced their way down, settling gently on the earth. She had once feared this kind of emptiness. A yard with no voices, a house with no footsteps, a schedule with no meetings. But now she found it beautiful. Not barren, not void, but spacious, sacred. She had come to see the beauty of empty hands. For most of her adult life, Sarah's hands had been full of responsibilities, full of groceries and keys and to-do lists, full of grief, of expectations, of the silent pressure, to always be doing more. But Buddhism had invited her to loosen her grip, not to let go of life, but to let go of clinging, to release the belief that her worth was tied to what she held, achieved, or proved. Attachment is the root of suffering. The Buddha. One of the most profound lessons Sarah had learned came not in words, but in the quiet motion of daily life. She had once clung to control, of outcomes, of people, of her carefully structured world. But life, with its own unyielding truth, had shown her otherwise. The death of her husband, the shift in family dynamics, the sudden stillness of retirement, everything she once held had slipped away. And yet, she had survived. More than survived. She had discovered that what remained, once everything was stripped away, was not a void, but a presence. Sarah began to walk each day with her palms slightly open at her sides. It became a small ritual, a reminder to soften, to release, to receive. She found herself doing less and noticing more, washing a single dish slowly, listening to the rustle of leaves like a prayer, tending to her small garden, not to produce, but to witness. When the mind is clear, joy follows like a shadow that never leaves. Buddha 1. Saturday, while sitting beneath her favorite oak tree, Sarah watched a squirrel run across a branch and leap to another. There was a gap in the trees, too wide, she thought, but the squirrel didn't hesitate. It let go, it flew, and it landed. She smiled. Letting go wasn't the end. It was the bridge. In her community circle, a woman named Alice once asked during tea, "How do you stop missing what you lost?" There was a long silence. Then Sarah, without thinking, replied softly, "You don't stop missing, you stop resisting the missing." Everyone nodded quietly. No one said more. But in their silence, there was a shared understanding that grief, when no longer fought, becomes a gentle companion, not something to push away, not something to fix, but something to walk with. Sarah's life had become smaller in size, perhaps, but infinitely larger in depth. She gave away many of her possessions, things that once held sentimental value, but now simply gathered dust. Old furniture, unused clothes, knickknacks from vacations long gone. She didn't get rid of them out of bitterness. She let them go as a ritual of renewal. Each item was held with gratitude, then released. Letting go gives us freedom, and freedom is the only condition for happiness. Thich Nhat Hanh, her home became more spacious, not just physically but energetically. She could feel her breath expand when she walked through her living room. There was air now, light, stillness, and with that emptiness came a fullness she hadn't expected. She had space to create, not to achieve, but to play. She painted a little. She wrote poetry. She sang in her kitchen, barefoot, to no one but the morning sun. And most importantly, she listened. To others, to herself, to life. One afternoon, while meditating on her back porch, a simple thought arose. I have nothing to prove. It moved through her like a soft wind, and she believed it. For decades, Sarah had held her hands tightly, gripped with the weight of roles and responsibilities, of love and fear. But now her hands were open, empty, free. She was no longer holding onto life with desperation. She was offering herself to it. To the mind that is still, the whole universe surrenders. Lao Tzu and so, Sarah learned to bow, not in performance, not in worship, but in reverence, to the sunrise, to the steam rising from her cup of tea, to the ache in her knee that reminded her she was alive, to the memory of her husband, now a warm presence instead of a heavy sorrow, to the wind, to the silence, to herself. This, she realized, was the beauty of empty hands, not grasping, not grasped, just being, just held, by the moment, by the breath, by something deeper than words. Dear friend, if you are carrying too much, if your hands have grown tired from holding the weight of the world, let this be your permission to open them, to soften your grip, to lay down what no longer serves you, to make room for the sacred simplicity of now. You do not need to fill your life with things to make it meaningful. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give ourselves is space. Because in that space, life arrives, and it always knows what to do. Next. Chapter 9. The Return. Sharing the truth she heard. There is a moment in the life of every seeker when solitude begins to sing, not as an escape, not as loneliness, but as something sacred, a kind of inner harmony that comes only when you've learned to sit quietly with yourself long enough to hear what the world was always trying to whisper. Sarah had come to love that quiet. It had healed her in ways no conversation ever could, and yet there came a day when she felt something stir in her chest, not restlessness, but readiness. A readiness not to leave her stillness, but to offer it. When you have found your own quiet center, you can return to the world, not as a beggar, but as a blessing. Jack Cornfield, it began with an email. A woman named Marjorie, who had received one of Sarah's tea letters through a mutual friend, wrote, "I don't know you, but your words found me on a very hard day. I just wanted to say, thank you. You helped me feel less invisible." Sarah stared at the message, her eyes full. For most of her life she had tried to be someone, a wife, a mother, a professional. But now, in this second life, this life after the unraveling, she was finally learning what it meant to be real, to be present, to be kind, to be simple, to be a quiet light. And now, gently, she was letting that light shine. Soon, more notes came. People sharing their own stories of loss, transition, and rediscovery. Some had lost partners. Some had retired and felt forgotten. Some were simply navigating the long quiet that comes after 60, the quiet no one prepares you for. Sarah, read every message with her full attention, not rushing, not advising, just holding space, as the monk had once done for her. She realized that the truth she had received, the whispered truth, was not hers to hoard. It was meant to be passed on. She began hosting small circles in her living room, no agenda, no lectures, just warm tea, cushions on the floor, and a bell that marked the beginning and end of each gathering. People came, a few at first, then more. Some had never meditated. Others came just for the silence. What they found over time was a kind of sacred permission to stop pretending, to stop striving, and to simply be. When one person discovers the truth of the present moment, they become a mirror for others to remember their own truth. Thich Nhat Hanh one afternoon, during a circle, a man named Peter, silver-haired, with eyes that had seen many storms, spoke softly. "I've spent so much of my life trying to matter, climbing ladders, fixing things. Now I sit alone most days and wonder who I am without all that." Sarah listened. She didn't rush to comfort or fill the silence. She simply met his gaze and said, "You matter, not because of what you did, but because you are still here, breathing, listening, human." His eyes filled. He nodded, and for the first time in months, he smiled. Sarah wasn't trying to be a teacher. She was just a woman who had walked through fire, found her breath on the other side, and now gently extended her hand to others walking the same path. She didn't speak of enlightenment or awakening in lofty terms. She spoke of the joy of stillness, the courage of sitting with grief, the freedom of empty hands, the peace of being enough. Sometimes during these gatherings, she would read aloud the monk's whispered truth. There is no need to fix your life. Just sit with your breath. You are already home. And every time she would see shoulders soften, eyes close, breath deepen, because that truth didn't belong to her. It belonged to all of us. When the student is ready, the teacher appears. But sometimes the teacher is a moment, a silence, a breath, a friend. Sarah had returned to the world, but she wasn't returning as the woman she once was. She returned not with answers, but with presence, not with ambition, but with stillness, not with doctrine, but with a quiet knowing that even after everything, even after loss, change, and starting over, peace is still possible, joy is still possible. Wholeness is still possible because it was never gone. It was just waiting, beneath the noise, the striving, the fear, for us to pause and remember. And so Sarah continued, not with a grand mission, but with simple devotion. One breath at a time, one letter at a time, one moment of presence at a time. She didn't preach, she practiced, and in that practice she became a light. Not a blinding light, but the gentle kind that fills a dark room with warmth and makes you feel somehow that you are not alone. Dear friend, if you've ever felt that your story no longer matters, if you felt invisible or uncertain of who you are now, let Sarah's return be a mirror for your own. You do not need to become someone new. You only need to remember the truth that is already alive within you. You are already at home. Let your silence speak. Let your presence heal. Let your breath remind you, again and again, that this moment is sacred, and so are you. You don't need to be extraordinary to be worthy. You only need to be real, and that, dear one, is enough. Chapter 10. You are not too late. You are right on time. There is a kind of peace that arrives not in youth, not even in middle age, but in the quiet clarity that comes after we have lost what we once thought defined us. Sarah sat on the back porch one evening watching the sun melt into the horizon. The sky was a painting of amber, coral, and lavender, as if the day itself were bowing in gratitude before disappearing. And in that still moment, she smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because she no longer needed it to be. This wasn't the life she had planned, but it had become the life she had accepted, and in that acceptance she had found freedom. Do not regret growing older. It is a privilege denied to many. Unknown Buddhist saying, there had been a time, not long after turning 60, when Sarah had feared she was too late for everything, too late for purpose, too late for love, too late to begin again. But now, at 66, she understood that this stage of life wasn't the end of her story. It was the unfolding of a deeper chapter, one that required fewer words and more presence. She didn't need to chase youth. She didn't need to mourn what could have been. She only needed to breathe and be here. One morning, while meditating, she recalled something the monk had once said: "Time is not a line, it is a circle. You are never behind, you are always arriving." And in that moment, Sarah wept, not from sorrow, but from recognition. All her life she had raced toward some imagined destination, a version of success, a version of wholeness, a version of herself that finally felt complete. But now she saw the truth. She had always been arriving. Every step, every mistake, every sorrow, it all belonged. What you are looking for is already where you are looking from. Francis of Assisi, often quoted in Zen circles. Sarah began to write this truth in her letters. She didn't offer advice. She offered reminders to the woman who felt invisible after her children moved. "Away," she wrote, "you are not a role. You are not your usefulness. You are light, and light does not age." To the man grieving the love he lost, she wrote, "You are not broken. Grief is love that has nowhere to go. Let it stay. It will teach you tenderness." To the older woman, who feared she had wasted her years, she wrote, "The flower does not apologize for blooming late. It simply blooms, and the garden is better for it." And to herself she often whispered, "I am not too late, I am right on time." She no longer felt urgency when people asked what she was doing now. Her answer was simple: "I am living, slowly. I'm living deeply. I'm living now." There was no need to impress, no need to accumulate, no need to perform. The life she lived was not measured in productivity, but in presence. Each morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most. The Buddha, one day, during a walk, Sarah passed a small group of children playing near a pond. One of them was building a tiny boat out of twigs and leaves. It floated for a moment, then tipped and sank. The child sighed, picked up the pieces and started again. No frustration, just quiet curiosity. Sarah stood still and let the scene wash over her. It struck her that this too was the essence of the spiritual path. We build, we lose, we begin again. There is no too late for the soul, only more beginnings. She remembered a Zen saying, "The obstacle is the path." She thought of her grief, her loneliness, the long, silent mornings after Tom had passed, all of it, not detours, but the very road that brought her here, to peace, to truth, to home. If you're listening now, perhaps with your own questions about time, about age, about whether it's too late to rediscover yourself, hear this: you are not behind. You are not lost. You are right on time to forgive yourself, right on time to let go, right on time to reclaim your breath, right on time to love without condition, especially yourself, right on time to live not the life you planned, But the life that's calling to you now, gentle, deep and honest, Sarah never became famous. She never went viral. She never led large retreats. But she became a light, one that shone quietly in her neighborhood, in her community, and in the inboxes of strangers who were, like her, simply trying to remember how to begin again. Her gift was not in the grand, but in the grounded. She sat, she breathed, she listened, and by doing so she reminded others of what had always been true. There is nothing wrong with you. You are not broken. You are not too late. Even if you cannot see the whole path, take the next step. It is enough. Buddhist teaching, so take the next breath, the next pause, the next cup of tea. Let yourself arrive, not where you thought you'd be, but where you are, because right here is sacred ground, and you, dear one, are not a mistake. You are a miracle in motion, softening, blooming, becoming, right on time. If this story has held your heart in any way, I invite you to breathe with me. Just one deep breath, in and out. That's all. That's enough. And if you feel called, subscribe and walk with us again. Not as a seeker of perfection, but as one who is learning to live gently, fully and freely. This is your time. This is your breath. This is your home. You are right on time.